He died yesterday
Oh no.
with Jack Dorsey and the whole sort of
Yeah,
Web3
yeah, yeah.
dialogue. Wow, that was a hot mess. It's still going on,
It's
by the
still
way.
going on. That's how hot that mess was. Oh, you know what's funny?
What?
A friend of mine found a Twitter account which tracks like big tech Twitter profiles and who they follow and unfollow. So every time a big Twitter user follows or unfollows somebody,
He
it
gets an alert.
it tweets it out.
This sounds like gossip magic right here.
I know Brian Armstrong. He unfollowed Brian Armstrong. I heard.
Exactly. So and Mark Andreessen from Andreessen Horowitz.
Yeah, I know. It's really, really interesting and telling for sure. But I think there was also some other conversations in the Twitter sphere
The
about
Twitter,
just sort of
yeah,
I talked to one
there's
of the
other conversations going on in other groups that
yeah.
are dovetailing from that conversation, which I think are also fascinating to follow. But you really have to go deep into the rabbit hole of these tweets to get the essence of what they're kind of challenging and debating over, which is really fascinating. It feels like a bit of a soap opera.
so this is like 10 years old or whatever, but I talked to like one of the database guys in the back end that worked at Twitter, and I asked him what his idea of like what the worst time ever. He's like, if Justin Bieber retweets Lady Gaga at the time, they were like the top Twitter users or whatever. I think they're still pretty up there, but he's saying if he retweets Lady Gaga without giving us a heads up ahead of time. He says the number of row updates and essentially retweets of retweets, it causes a 30% spike in our load. And if we didn't plan for it, it's a thing. So literally, they had their media teams they have an own person at the time that they would basically coordinate with them before they do something like that. I hope they've done some architectural upgrades since then, because whenever I see one of these conversations with Elon Musk, retweet someone as a thing, I just imagine that dude just running around the servers on fire in the background. I imagine it's improved since then, but it's comical to imagine.
Pretty much, Chris. It's the comical, geeky stuff too.
And pinned. Okay, so I just pinned a link to the top of the Tech News Twitter account about this room, so people can enjoy that. And we do this for free. This is a free room, right? Because these paid rooms are coming, right? Twitter already is enabling this, where people can charge for their Twitter spaces. We don't do that, and we don't charge for the Clubhouse room, even if we could. And I don't think we can yet in Clubhouse. And we don't have sponsors, and we don't ask you to use the tip jar, and we don't even ask you to follow the people on stage like all those shitty rooms do. You know what I'm talking? You guys know what I'm talking about when I say that, right? You know what I'm talking about?
Of course.
Those really, those
God,
rooms
yeah.
that you shouldn't be in, that keep telling you to follow the mods. You know what I'm talking about?
Tyler, is this your announcement for new merch?
No, all I ask is I need to get the link to the tweet I just twatted on the Tech News Twitter account. There's the link, and I'm pinning it to the top of the Clubhouse. And so for those who don't know, we are a very unique show, for lack of a better word, because we are simultaneously live with a live audience in Clubhouse. We just opened 2 minutes ago, and we're already at 150.
It's a freaking transmedia operation right here.
Yeah, and then we are simultaneously in Twitter Spaces, and there's an audience in each, and you can speak on either stage simultaneously, and both rooms can hear. Bada boom! That's how we do. Now, the only thing
cross-platform transmedia, this is Web 3.0, whatever, just all the buzzwords.
This is like Web 7.2 beta or something like that. So, and by the way, we don't even use software or hardware like this. I just got my laptop next to my phone.
We're completely decentralized cloud magic, right?
Dude, this is like full on old school. So, because everyone keeps messaging me, how did you figure out how to get both platforms working with both audiences simultaneously? Well, it's really quite magical. I put my phone next to my laptop so that both of you so everyone can hear each other.
The latest in tech right here.
This is the hot tech right here.
So it's the old school way.
It's the OG, and
man, if only they had the headphone jack, it would have made it so much easier.
But what my very simple ask is that you help share the room, either the link at the top of the Clubhouse room, or if you're in Twitter Space, just share it in the little link in the bottom right hand corner or whatever that is, and follow the. I think you have to follow my personal Twitter account because that's what is the creator of the content of the rooms. It's kind of weird. Maybe I should talk to Twitter about that and change that to the TNATW Twitter account to be the host of the rooms. Anyway, so thank you to the 5 people who have already retweeted my most recent pinned tweet on the Tech News Twitter account to help get the word out that we're live on both these platforms, and that's great, whichever platform you prefer. That's why we do both. And we're going to jump right into it. And you can raise your hand and jump up on. The format is really simple. We meet every day for a couple hours. We talk through the headlines that have any relation to tech whatsoever. And we want, if you have a hot take or any kind of expertise related or an interesting insight to share with the class, we want to hear it. That's how it works. Just raise your hand, ask for the mic. If you seem like a normal person, we will give it to you. If you, however, the other strong rule is if you don't seem like a normal person, we absolutely won't give it to you. Or if you clearly you're not using your real name or your real photo, or you don't have a bio, or heaven forbid you have less than 5 Twitter followers. So we try to avoid people with bogus accounts from making idiotic comments and that kind of thing. That's how we keep the quality high and all that. So with that said, I'm ready. Cheryl, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Cheryl was born ready. She walked all over Ginza today. So there's the air horn. Here we go. So the top story today, happy Wednesday, December 22nd, 3 more days of Christmas shopping, is that amid COVID-19 concerns, Facebook, now known as Meta, Amazon, Ring, which is part of Amazon, Twitter, and others are canceling their in-person plans to attend the world's premier consumer electronics show called CES, which stands for Consumer Electronics Show. That's kind of clever how they did that. So CES, as it's known, or the Consumer Electronics Show, is, for those who've never been, let me just explain it to you. It's Burning Man for geeks. That's what it is. It's all of every gadget.
With lots of walking. Lots and lots of walking.
Well, it's Burning Man, but people are fully dressed. Not nearly as many drugs, much less sex, and no bicycles. Very few bicycles, and a whole lot of people.
Drugs.
A whole lot of people in really bad suits and trying to sell lots of gadgets. And
if you ever want to, like at Burning Man, if you ever just want to have someone randomly walk up to you and try to basically pitch you the next hot app, or have like some random widget, like some kitchen cleaner that happens to be on the blockchain or something, yeah, this is the place to be.
So CES is the premier gadget event on the planet, and all the big hardware manufacturers and all the small hardware manufacturers all get together, and they have their big annual day, and that's it. Well, it's many days, and it takes over all of Las Vegas. And the hotel's rooms in Las Vegas go from $100 a night to $700 a night during CES. I mean, it's a big.
Not this time, Tyler.
I know,
not this time. You can get rooms.
That's what I mean. This is the issue: is people are not going. Apparently, there's some cold or flu virus going around, and it's causing people concern about going back to CES. So that's the headline: that Meta, Amazon Ring, Twitter, and dozens of others are canceling their in-person plans yet again for CES. Now, this is not the concepts of COVID and CES. For those who are history buffs and headline buffs, you will know that many people in the West believe that CES 2020, am I right, was perhaps, because it's in January, the first major COVID super spreader event.
Oh yeah. They don't want the Omicron Part 2.
So yeah, now it could be the major Omicron super spreader event.
There were so many headlines around that time period. I was trying to remember essentially like who was first on that, but yeah, that you're right. That was
well. Just to be fair, because I'm in Vegas. I mean, There was a conference from I think it was Biogen up in Boston that actually was on a, maybe not as big as CES, but they had kind of a big spreader event there because nobody knew. So I mean, but that was before CES.
But now it's willful. Unfortunately, essentially, they didn't pass the thing that made business holders liable for.
Well, Chris. First of all, CES is also virtual. If people want to do the virtual part,
Sure.
there's virtual. Okay. Second of all, I should point out. I mean, to defend Las Vegas a bit, I'm not going to be defending it perfectly because we still allow smoking in casinos, which means that people take down their masks. But we do have a mask requirement in Clark County, which includes Las Vegas, and we've had that mask requirement now for a long time, meaning that we've had a mask requirement when New York City didn't. Okay, and it's pretty shocking that Las Vegas had tighter regulations on masking than New York City, but that is the truth. So right now we have less of a problem with this virus than the city of New York. So that's a fact.
Tourism revenues down worldwide, especially in areas that essentially are hubs. So I mean, like Las Vegas, it's a thing. So I mean, I understand the incentive to basically make sure it's like, well, let's get up and going as fast as possible.
Casino revenues this year hit a record, by the way.
There you go.
You got those
Record.
stimmy checks on black. So that is pretty simple headline, but it draws it takes away the thunder of this annual event, because as a major tech event organizer myself, it's we're all eager to get back to these very strong landmark events like CES, like E3, which is the big video game one in LA, or what have you. Every industry has their big events, and CES is one of the biggest. And yeah,
it's almost worth reading just for the tired journalists that all of them get sent to it every year, and they're like, it's the same as last year, and so it's all them complaining. Look, it's a gadget. Look, it's another gadget. Look, it's another gadget. And they're so overworked.
Chris, people
really
don't come out. Chris, people don't even come out anymore to see the gadgets. You know what they come out for? To try all the new restaurants, because we were always changing the restaurants, and we've got really great food. I mean, on par with New York or San Francisco or anywhere else. Okay, because we import these restaurants from all over the world.
Yeah.
So that's part.
Yes, and I did. Speaking of the journalist angle of CES, which is a critical angle, because that's what the whole song and dance is about. It's all the companies go there to make their big announcements for the year. Notably, one company doesn't participate. They do their own event called Apple. So Apple doesn't do CES because they do their annual event in the spring, the Worldwide Developer Conference, and then they have their own major product event every second Tuesday in September, where they launch.
They will pay for some really big snarky billboards on the side of the buildings, though.
Yeah, they will.
What happens on iPhone stays on Apple or something like that.
But it's interesting how Apple is kind of the one holdout who doesn't participate in CES. But for the rest of the consumer electronics world, they all get together and compete to get coverage. And all the tech journalists go. They have to. It's the biggest day of the year for tech journalism, especially the hardware side. And all the big hardware manufacturers go. And I went one year with the Engadget team, which is one of the notable tech gadget blogs called Engadget.
They are more well respected than the Gizmodo team, which I think was banned for them for a while.
Yes,
from the TV incident.
Gizmodo got banned by Apple, by Steve Jobs personally, for not returning the iPhone as he did, wished, and that's.
No, I was referring to the one where we want the TV be gone, and they started turning off all the TVs during the demos with the IR codes. That was a fun one.
I went with.
They were in some hot water for a little bit.
Yeah, I went with Engadget in 2007 to make videos for them, because they had not really done videos yet, and they were just they were text and blog and photos. And it was a real treat to go and see how they cover CES, because they have backstage invites to every single thing, and they're actually being harassed by every company there, from Samsung and Sony to Lenovo to you name it, to please come cover our announcements, whenever they happen to be. And that year, Bill Gates was there, and Bill Gates asked to meet. And Ryan Block, who was the editor at the time, or co-editor, kind of unpreparedly jumped into a fireside chat with Bill Gates, who he had been dreaming of, and he couldn't believe it. And he got very, very nervous because it was unscheduled and kind of unrehearsed, and he just couldn't believe his good fortune of falling into that scenario, and it was kind of wild. And it was anyway, that was fun to watch somebody get to interview one of their heroes like that in a way. I don't know that it's his hero, but somebody that he wildly looks up to, as you can imagine, as a tech, journalist, getting in their first big interview with Bill Gates is kind of a big deal. So, I mean, there was a lot of crazy things that happened from behind the scenes. It was really interesting to see how, I've made a significant tech blog, one of the biggest tech blogs, covers CES. That was a lot of fun. I have a very fond memory of that visit. So it's hectic. My God, it's nonstop from morning till morning, and you get a short nap of 3-4 hours, and then it's back at it for 3-4 days in a row. And by the end, you are exhausted, my Lord. So the second big story is from the Financial Times. They say they have sources. That means somebody leaked something, and these sources detail how a 2019 NSO deal to sell Pegasus services to Uganda, followed by an attempt to hack U.S. diplomats in Uganda using Pegasus, led to NSO's decline. So,
Someone pissed off Five Eyes.
We wondered, how is it that NSO Pegasus was revealed? How did it come to be that they got caught? Who let the cat out of the bag that this thing exists, right? And then we read about a month ago about these U.S. diplomats in Uganda who had their phones hacked, which they shouldn't be, because NSO Group, the makers of Pegasus, have always claimed, we don't hack Americans. So, hey, America, don't worry. We're on your side. We're not going to hurt you. We're not using this against you. Promise, promise, promise. And it turns out that these U.S. diplomats in Uganda were hacked. And that is what led to their downfall. Because if the U.S. wasn't being hacked by Pegasus, then the U.S. Honestly probably doesn't really care and might even in some weird ways be benefiting from Pegasus. But if you're hacking our diplomats, well, then we got to shut this show down. So
do keep in mind, these are spooks we're talking about. These are the guys that invented the concept of parallel construction for protecting sources of methods. For people that want to search that term for parallel construction, it has to do with essentially where if they want to protect, saying, "Oh, we're wiretapping this," or we've got this group that is one of our someone that's spying on a group for us. They will invent false origin stories. So I just want to throw some just a little bit of shade and say some salt on this. Just be careful not to take everything at face value. It's probably is of likely origin, but you never can tell with spook guys.
So the article says that in February 2019, an Israeli woman sat across from the son of Uganda's president and made an audacious pitch. Would he want to secretly hack any phone in the world? Lieutenant General Muhuzi, in charge of his father's security and long-whispered successor, was keen, said two people familiar with the sales pitch. After all, the woman who has ties to Israeli intelligence, what a surprise, was pitching him Pegasus, a piece of spyware so powerful that Middle East dictators and autocratic regimes had been paying tens of millions of dollars per year for it for years. But for NSO, the Israeli company that created Pegasus, this dalliance into East Africa would prove to be the moment it crossed a red line, infuriating U.S. diplomats and triggering a chain of events that would see it blacklisted by the Commerce Department, pursued by Apple, and driven to the verge of defaulting on its loans, according to interviews with U.S. and Israeli officials, industry insiders, and NSO employees. Yeah, exactly. They had been doing this for years, and the U.S. knew they were doing it for years and didn't really care, as I said, until the U.S. was on the receiving end of this, because this Uganda heir decide to pay for it, and then used it against Americans, and America said, okay, game over. So a few months after the initial pitch, NSO's chief executive landed in Uganda to seal the deal, according to two people familiar with NSO's East Africa business. Julio, who flew the world, which is NSO's CEO, who flew the world with the permission of the Israeli government to sell Pegasus, liked to demonstrate in real time how it could hack a brand new boxed iPhone. The eventual business was small for NSO. A person familiar with the transaction said it brought in between $10 and $20 million, a fraction of the $243 million that was estimated the privately owned NSO made in revenues in 2020. So, yeah, well, this is interesting math, because that's what we assumed, that it was $10 million per year. And those were the rumors prior to reading this article. And I can understand how for a bigger country, it might even be as high as double that. And then if they've got 10, 15, 20 different countries that they're selling it to, then yeah, you would get to around $240, $250 million a year. All that math all adds up. But about 2 years after the sales pitch, someone deployed Pegasus to try and hack the phones of 11 American diplomats and employees of the U.S. Embassy in Uganda, according to U.S. officials who spoke after notifications were sent out by Apple when the iPhone maker discovered and closed a flaw in its operating system in November. It is not clear who tried to hack the U.S. citizens. Uganda's neighbor, Rwanda, had also been using Pegasus to hack phones inside Uganda, but the revelation shocked the U.S. NSO has always told its customers that U.S. phone numbers are off limits. In this case, all 11 targets were using Ugandan numbers, but had Apple logins using their State Department emails, according to U.S. officials. NSO said it shut down the hacking systems for customers relevant to this case and is investigating the issue. A person familiar with the company said it has no longer any business in Africa. The presidential press secretary for Uganda and the Minister of Information for the Ugandan government did not reply to a request for comment. A person close to the government said they were not authorized to speak on the subject. Israeli and U.S. officials declined to comment that the Ugandan hack directly triggered a decision to blacklist NSO, but one U.S. official who discussed the issue with Israel's defense ministry said, quote, "Look at the entire sequence of events here. This is careful, not by chance." He added that putting NSO, one of the jewels of Israeli's tech community, on a U.S. blacklist was designed to, quote, punish and isolate the company. The blacklisting, which came in November, means that NSO cannot buy any equipment, service, or intellectual property from U.S.-based companies without approval, crippling a company whose terminals ran on servers from Dell and Intel, routers from Cisco, and whose desktop computers run on Windows operating systems, according to a spec sheet from a sale to Ghana in West Africa in recent weeks. For instance, Intel asked all its employees to cease any ongoing business relationships with NSO.
Hey, Tyler, this is the follow along with Chris's story, but look at the words of this article. So first off, NSO, it's a commercial. I mean, they sell the product, right? So their agreement was that they allegedly wouldn't sell it to companies who would use it for nefarious things like, tapping U.S. Ambassadors or whoever in Uganda, right? And they started, they got caught doing that. And you can remember, it's also what was used to monitor journalists. And so the fall of NSO, because we blacklisted them. I mean, those are some pretty harsh words, and they already have this equipment. So maybe they can't get more from the U.S., but again, they can get it elsewhere, China or Israel, right? So this is like definitely painting them in a light that is
right.
a bit more than what's actually going on.
I agree. And thank you for pointing that out. There's another interesting detail in this, beyond what the point Jennifer just made, which is that Intel is being told by the government, hey, you can't do anything with this. And this puts kind of Intel's feet to the fire. And Intel then says in this article, Intel said in a statement that it complies with all applicable U.S. laws, including U.S. export control regulations. Now hold that thought. Because, why? Well, here's why. Because Intel is in the news today. There's an upcoming headline from somebody found one. I forget who found it, but it's about Intel angering China because Intel just made a statement saying, hey, China, please do your very best to make sure that anyone working on any of our products have nothing to do with the Xinjiang province and the Uyghurs. Could you do that for us, please? And that has caused a tweet inside of China, where they don't have Twitter, they have what's called Weibo. It's kind of a clone of Twitter. And that tweet has gone viral to the tune of 250 million retweets. 250 million. because as H&M knows and Nike knows, when H&M decided to say, hey, we don't want to use cotton from the Xinjiang region, there were viral videos of people burning H&M clothes and spitting on H&M's logo and burning their logo and going berserk. Anti-H&M sentiment across China. Similarly, Intel should have known that's what happened to H&M, and now a similar sort of scenario is unfolding for Intel, where if you take this kind of a posture, which the U.S. is the only reason Intel's doing this posture is because the U.S. is sort of insisting on it, right?
Yeah, when you take $40 billion, in future stuff, they might have a few strings attached, being like, please don't basically sponsor genocide camps. That can stack up on those strings attached factor.
Yeah. So let me find this article for you. I mean, you get the idea, but it's essentially caused a whole lot of headache for Intel.
Tyler, I just DM you. Check. It's Bloomberg's. I found
Thank
Bloomberg's.
you, Davey.
Intel has not been successful at competing in the market for over a decade. They have fallen behind so many technological advances on the process nodes. They've shipped late, and essentially they're having their lunch eaten by AMD. They miss NVIDIA stuff. And so essentially, when they've not been successful at succeeding on a market basis, they have turned to politics to prop them up in a too big to fail fashion. So they basically have the U.S. government basically plow in tens of billions of dollars of future commitments in order to basically get their stuff online. Now, one of the strings that comes with that is you are now an agent of politics. You're going to see more of these headlines, not just with, hey, let's build some fabs in Arizona. It's going to be used increasingly as a, well, you can build them here, but don't build them in this country. And oh, by the way, can you basically, can we have your executives show up at, next to some photo ops? You're going to see more intense versions of that, because those photo ops are going to be less of a, here's a nice thing on the White House lawn, and it's going to be more of a, hey, we need you to make a statement in support of our new basically initiative when we're doing this and this and that. And you're going to see more and more of those sorts of things appear because Intel is no longer the market force that it once was.
So it's funny. I didn't read this article that BB just shared. It's at the top of the Clubhouse room, and hopefully Cheryl will share it at the top of the Twitter Spaces room. And it says that foreign companies operating in China are finding it increasingly difficult to strike a balance as they try to maintain access to its huge market without ignoring concerns in their home nations. Western governments, including the U.S., have accused Beijing of imposing forced labor in Xinjiang, including in the cotton industry, and imposed sanctions over the alleged human rights abuses. China has said the allegations are unfounded and retaliated with sanctions of its own. H&M, the fast fashion retailer that once counted China as its fourth largest market, was boycotted by local consumers and forced to shutter stores after saying it stopped sourcing China from Xinjiang, as I said before we even shared this article. So that was well known that happened with H&M. The U.S. government knows incredibly well that happened with H&M, and the U.S. government, Intel isn't voluntarily, self-inflictingly, self-flagellatingly making this announcement that you see in the top of the headline. Intel faces online criticism in China over Xinjiang labor stance. Intel would prefer not to keep their mouth shut and do business as usual. So what's really going on here? Well, I'll tell you what's really going on here is the U.S. government is forcing Intel to make this statement in China, knowing it will piss China off and knowing it will hurt Intel's business in China, and exacerbating this decoupling.
Well, I mean, it's the same thing that Apple, when they're willing to basically, remove some Taiwanese flags from iPhone apps and stuff like that, or provide more local source data. It's like, well, we're gonna own the keys, but by the way, we're gonna partner with this local data firm, and by the way, you've got 24/7 access to the same facility, which people that are familiar with, if you got physical access, that kind of negates a lot of digital security measures. The thing is that Apple basically aligned themselves more heavily with with making the government happy. Other groups, essentially with large corporations, have basically said, well, we're going to throw in with the USA side. So everyone's trying to make the relationship work in some ways, but it's this like, mommy and daddy are fighting. Who's going to get the fabs? This kind of relationship is happening right now. This is the failing stage of a long running experiment where the West said, back with Kissinger saying, if we basically increase essentially trade, if we basically increase commerce, then this will basically lead to a boost in human rights. And after 30 years or so, 40 odd years or so of this experiment, it's more or less not turning out as originally expected. So they're trying other options now.
Alrighty, so that was just an additional aside to the original topic that we were ranting on about, which was the second article about the NSO.
With Uganda?
Yeah, it was how NSO in Uganda and, how companies are forced to say, we're not able to work with this, and it gets them in this. It becomes a geopolitical game that impacts global trade, is what it turns into.
Very briefly on the international trade thing. So, all right, there's less than 100,000 tons of rare earths exports. You can get these anywhere in the world. They're just more convenient to scrub out the mud in Congo and some of the areas and shove out through Kenya on the other side. The thing is that every single military planner, politician, and world leader has been told that rare earths are the future, and everything from advanced materials to batteries to all these other things require rare earths to build. And so they're like, where do you get these? Well, they're in Africa. It's like, all right, we need to spin up this whole thing. So China's got their whole operations there. UK is starting to get involved. America's essentially, quietly flexing behind the scenes. And the most popular movie in China was literally one in which essentially they made more money with it than the Avengers. Was essentially like the tiger diplomacy is this whole thing of basically going in and kicking ass and building factories and then basically exporting all the stuff out. The thing why this is relevant for Uganda is NSO Group has basically, if they've sold this to one government, they sold it to another. Five Eyes has known that they've basically been hacked or whatever from if it's likely from Uganda, it's likely from a number of other groups as well. The reason why they chose to reveal the Uganda version of this is kind of interesting because it's sending as much of a signal as whatever other source they could have basically used to peg on them. So that itself is sending a signal. What I just want to just highlight here is that the motivations for that are flawed because a lot of the groups who are doing this don't necessarily do this sort of purely for economic reasons. There's other things at stake.
So check this out. Let's keep this same thread rolling because this gets very interesting on this next article. And apologies, I forget who shared it, but it's from Nikkei Japan, which is one of the remaining fantastic publications of the world. It's like the BBC of Japan and covers Asia in a brilliant way. Yeah, strangely, one of the most shared publications here in tech news around the world on a daily basis, just kind of coincidentally. So the topic of this article that came out today is China's Luxshare builds an iPhone mega plant to challenge Foxconn because Foxconn, which is Taiwanese, which builds the iPhones, the iPhone in your pocket was assembled by Foxconn, designed by Apple, assembled by Foxconn. And Foxconn's planning to move to Vietnam because Apple has told it, we don't want to make phones in China anymore. Can we please get out of there? Can you please open a factory? All the Foxconn main factories and campuses are in China. And Foxconn's now moving to Vietnam. Oh, what a surprise. How interesting. We covered that about 3 weeks ago, the details of that. And although that's not widely known yet. And now China's building a replacement in China, obviously. And this gets very interesting. So China's Luxshare builds iPhone mega plant to challenge Foxconn. Chinese assembler is making aggressive bid to expand in Apple's supply chain. With the facility it is building in eastern China, and when you hear eastern China, the word Xinjiang should ring in your head because you basically have Xinjiang in Tibet. And I'm pretty sure they're not going to build these in Tibet. Well, I don't want anyone to confuse Tibet with China either, but the Xinjiang is eastern China. So this is, again, touches on all these issues. And Luxshare aims to assemble millions of iPhones as early as next year. Well, let's see what Apple does. That'll be this whole issue between Apple and China is going to get really, really interesting. It was just revealed a week or so ago that Apple had done a secret backdoor deal, just for a small little amount of about $275 billion to play in China, to do business with China for 10 years.
Wait, I think, Tyler, a lot of this also
5 years.
a lot of this came about under Clinton as well. Isn't that when Clinton brought China into the world world organizations?
World Trade Organization.
And now this coupling, and which has turned out not to work for our benefit in trade.
The China entered the World Trade Organization 2001, 2002. Yeah, was Clinton. Yeah.
Yeah, my understanding is that was has caused a lot of mess around there and in Thailand and everywhere else, and that's the coupling that we is now not working out for us.
Well, the point I want to make here is that this Apple issue is really interesting, and but they kind of are in a codependent relationship to some degree, and Apple's the one that's starting to make moves out, and I think China really doesn't want to lose Apple assembly there, and yeah. Anyway, so
And Tyler, in last month, November, I think it's the November 24 around, we read the news also that Taiwan's, it's called Far East Group, they found, they find their group in China about 13 million US dollars. So I think for Foxconn, because the founder and Jerry Guo, this is maybe an opportunity to do coupling the fox come from China as well, because in China they can find you for any reason, especially this time for the pandemic. Jerry Go, he bought 5 million doses Pfizer vaccines for Taiwan. So actually, it's very political thing. So maybe this
for,
is a good chance, yeah, for him
for
to
who?
move from out. Of course, the challenge from China's factory is another issue, but this may be not as bad as what it looks like.
Who are you talking about? For who?
Yeah, Far East Group last month they were fined by China by CCP government for uh, very strange reason, but it's fined
Maybe
for
say it.
yeah, it's me, baby. Yeah,
Maybe who
yeah, sure.
again?
And the Far Eastern Group in China, but Far
Far,
East Group is Taiwan's
hold
for
maybe,
the shipment and the
maybe
airlines. Yeah,
Far
it's
Eastern
Far
Group.
Eastern Group. Yeah, they were fined
Far,
for 13 million US dollars.
I'm just trying to get the name.
Oh, Far Eastern
Far
Group.
Eastern Group. Thank you very much. So the next one is the Washington Post has done a survey of 1,058 American internet users. And the Washington Post says out of this massive study, this is, the Washington Post just can't not do these things. What let's read the headline and then we'll dive into what's really going on behind this headline. And if you join us regularly, you'll know what's really going on behind this headline. So it says they interviewed 1,058 U.S. internet users. Long story short, 72% of them distrust Facebook, 63% distrust TikTok, 60% distrust Instagram, 53% distrust WhatsApp, 53% also distrust YouTube and Amazon, 48% distrust Google, and 44% distrust Apple. Okay, so let's read a little bit. It says, pulled between not trusting some tech companies and still wanting to use their products, people look to government regulation, according to the Washington Post. Here's the headline. Americans widely distrust Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram with their data poll finds. Okay. No agenda here. No agenda at all. I'm sure it's just a pure coincidence that the Washington Post competes with those companies for revenue, for advertisers. I'm sure that's just a coincidence. I'm sure it's just a coincidence that they hint, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. That these people who they polled are looking to the government for regulation. Although I imagine, I wonder, is that one of the poll questions? Do you hope the government will regulate them? Click here for yes, so that we can include that. 99% of Americans want big tech regulated, says this poll. Well, the fact of the matter is, if you took any kind of critical thinking class, or if you had decent parents, then you know what this is really going on about, which is Facebook and Instagram. The Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times can't not write a hit piece. They must have a hit piece every day. It's like, if there isn't a hit piece being written today, why even go into work? We got to cover the main stories, but absolutely, there's no point in continuing the publication if we're not attacking the company who stole all our business. all our revenue, all our advertising dollars. This son of a bitch, Mark Zuckerberg, ruined our business. So we must have a hit piece every day, and this is today's hit piece against them. But should they not have to disclose to be a little transparent that about that fact, which they aren't at all, is kind of my question. And the article says you'll find all the usual technology suspects inside Mary Veselka's Texan home. There, her iPhone, a school-issued iPad for her young daughter, and the latest boxes delivered from Amazon. The full-time mother has an active Facebook account and a TikTok account, and sitting in her living room is an Echo speaker. It's Alexa voice assistant, always ready to add items to her shopping list and to turn on the lights. Like many Americans, her daily life is saturated with the products and services pushed by big technology companies, paid and free. And like many Americans, she simultaneously does not trust the business of the people running them when it comes to privacy issues, but can't simply shake them off either. She doesn't like the way Facebook collects her personal data to target ads, or the kinds of videos YouTube offers her child. And she suspects that her devices are always listening. Quote, we go into it knowing that we can't really trust them, but I don't think we can get around not using it. Veselka, 30 years old, said of her technology. I've tried giving up Facebook for a period of time. It's just not really something you can do and still maintain a regular social life. It's the rare thing that Americans of all ages across the political spectrum largely seem to agree on. They don't trust social media services with their information, and they view targeted ads as annoying and invasive. Well, yeah. You mean that thing that killed your business? Those targeted ads? That thing that they do way better than you? That absolutely took away all of the power that you've had for decades and maybe even a century?
Tyler, and can't have a social life without Facebook? Seriously?
Right.
Seriously?
Hey, she tried.
Well,
Maybe,
let's be fair.
maybe get
She's
out of
under
your
30,
yeah,
so
but maybe
that
get
means
out.
that she grew up with
Yeah.
social media.
In
No,
fairness,
let's
hey,
be like in context in it. It's like she
hey,
probably had Facebook when she was 15, same as me, and that's around my age as well. So it's
and
like,
in all fairness, she's
yeah,
living
we
in a trailer park in Texas. So go ahead and try and be social living in a trailer park in Texas. It ain't easy. I'll give
and
her that.
plus it's COVID now. It's like you're gonna need to be on your phone, and socials is one. It's a distraction, yes, but at the same time, you do catch up with people that are around you at the same time. Like without socials, you wouldn't know who's recently got engaged, etc., etc. Apart from having a text from that person if you're really that close. But some people you're not so close to, but you're close enough for socials. Like if we're gonna be like real, like better than the journalists, then at least use the cultural context of that part of it, because we are in a plague at the moment, and she is 30. I believe it said 30, right? So I understand being on socials, living through socials, but at the same time, I don't necessarily need it, but it is a necessity for business, let's say. But on her side, I can technically understand that.
Yeah. So it turns out they show the results of this in a graph, which you can see by clicking at the link at the top of the Clubhouse room. And I imagine Cheryl's also sharing it at the top of the Twitter space because we're streaming in both rooms simultaneously as we do. And it shows the graphical breakdown. As I said, 72% trust not much Facebook. So if that's the wording here, I trust not much or I trust not at all. 72% said that of Facebook, and then interestingly, Amazon 40% trust not much or at all Amazon, but 53% trust a great deal Amazon. So more people, 53% trust Amazon a great deal, and only 40% distrust it. I find that quite interesting. 44% trust Apple, 40% don't. Microsoft is split right down the middle at 42 and 43. Google also right down the middle, 47, 48. And by the way, those right there, those four, those are your big tech companies. Google, Microsoft, Apple, and Amazon. Those are the big ones. The other
Yeah,
one,
but how I would put something in perspective
yes,
when these polls are constructed, they're generally constructed poorly. So when people say they trust Amazon, most people who interact with Amazon vastly more are using it for shopping as opposed to Alexa.
right.
Okay, so I have
Yeah,
Amazon Prime, but I don't have Alexa, so I don't want Alexa in my home. Okay, but so I mean you have to put that in context. They don't go into this different like subfields that these companies, are in, and so that they're picking one thing over another. So what's Google? There's Google search, but there's also
Okay,
YouTube. I
okay.
mean, there's different parts of Google.
and also like they give you something. Apple gives you something.
Got
Amazon has a trusted service that delivers you something.
to check
Where
this out.
Facebook, what it
Oh,
gives you is ephemeral. It's like it's intoxicating, and
oh.
that's about it.
So the next question that they asked people was question. Just your best guess. How often do you think your phone or other tech devices listen to you in ways you do not agree to? What percentage of people think their devices are listening to them in ways they do not agree to?
Yeah, but
Very
Tyler, that's word back to wording, not agree to. So they probably clicked through some terms of service that said I agree. So maybe
right,
they don't understand versus
right,
agree,
right.
right? And there's also
Correct.
privacy settings where you can monitor. Maybe the phone's always
Yeah,
listening to you, but there are
and
different privacy
plus,
settings.
So the question
sorry,
is, what
jump in.
percent of people feel that their devices are listening to them in ways they do not agree to? What percent believe that their phones are listening to them very often, as
I would
as
say over 50%.
as compared to somewhat often, as compared to rarely or never? So there's four choices. Your choices are very often, somewhat often, rarely, and never. How many? What percent say very often?
I'm gonna say 55%.
Yeah,
Eight,
it's
70.
in that 40
eight.
fifty
Yeah, I think
percent
it's very high.
35% said very often. Another 37% said somewhat often, and there for a combined total there of 72%. And then 20% said rarely, and 8% said never. So people assume the vast majority believe that their devices are listening at least somewhat often in ways that they do not agree to. Okay, and yet they own them and use them. Nobody is again. There's those things can be, you don't, as Ken says, he believes that too, right? Ken, you would believe they're listening somewhat often or very often, and that's why you don't have one in your house. Am I right?
For Corey, same reason. Same reason why
Yeah,
I prefer Android over Apple.
I feel like you pass a threshold, and it's not really a feeling, it's like more so than anything else. You understand that you pass a threshold when it comes to in-home tech at this age, right? It's less on the, oh, it's a ubiquitous side, and more on the, I'm an innovator, I like tech. So you understanding that the tech is listening in your house is much different than I need a phone to text and call people, and this phone may be doing X, Y, and Z. And the Facebook files are more ubiquitous, right? And the Apple ones, where Apple is selling data, or actually, let me not say it like that. Seeing as this recording, but Apple can has backdoors that are vulnerable to people. Let me put it that way, right? And not everybody knows that, not yet, anyways. But knowing your phone is listening is kind of one of those, we understand, but it's still my phone.
It's convenience. It's all the IoT devices, right? So your Alexa, your Echo, your whatever, talking to your cat robot, your phones. I mean, you're trading convenience for these exposures or vulnerabilities, and it's a big trade off. And so, what people, the best we can do is, instead of these hype articles like this, is say, if they'd written this and said, instead, why don't you read the terms of service and understand what you're getting in
Right,
exchange for your data, or
right.
you're giving, or your convenience of using this device. Like it needs to be more on the education side, and yes, there needs to be ethics. Correct.
Okay, we've passed a threshold now where, like, I literally had a tweet about this earlier where I was talking about the difference between what socials do and what these companies are doing with smart tech, which is trying to be all listening and all hearing and just everything, right? So they want to see and listen at the same time. Where I'm paying for something, right? If I have a smart refrigerator, the refrigerator only needs to be smart for me. It shouldn't be smart for the company behind it. It should be a closed network. It should be my refrigerator connects to my phone or my other house devices, and that's it. But we don't necessarily have that, and we're paying exorbitant prices
Yeah,
for
it's
these
a quaint idea, but I mean these manufacturers, particularly like home goods, they're making half their revenue now on services and advertising. Like if you look at like the LG and other smart home TV companies,
Yeah,
they make as much on ads and services that they sell to you on their TV as selling the TVs themselves. So
exactly. And
we've
my
gone to
point
this whole new
is,
world of smart home. It's wild, it's crazy.
So
yeah.
check this out.
And the crux of my tweet, let me just finish this off. Like the
Right.
crux of my tweet was basically, I am paying directly for something, right? I am going out of pocket to have this thing for myself. Whereas on socials, you are saying, I can connect to this network for free, and there's a trade off between my data and the company so that they can keep running. And people kind of understand that, but what a lot of people don't understand is the fact that if you buy a device, the device is going to be listening forever for that company, not for you.
Okay, so check this out. So you remember I jokingly said before we even opened this article that I bet they're going to ask one of the questions on the survey. Do you think big tech should be more regulated? Check yes. Remember, I just half jokingly made that joke. Check it out. Next question. Do you think government should do more to regulate how internet companies handle privacy issues, or should the government not get more involved? And there it is.
Yeah,
That
that's a weird
the
question.
fact
And
the fact that I could predict that they were going to include that question tells you the exact impetus, the entire reason to entre for this article is they want to send a signal as the Washington Post, which is what the politicians read, that, hey, politicians, the people want you to regulate big tech and you're not doing it and they want it. And here's your signal that you should do it because we did the homework for you. You're not sure which side of this issue you should be on.
But I would answer yes to
This,
that question. So I appreciate the
fine.
motivation.
Fine. I'm
In
just
fact,
saying,
this is
but
a reasonable question
but
to ask when
that's
I'm sure
fine.
most people
I have
would
no problem
agree.
with that. But let's be clear. You are no longer a journalist. You are an agenda. You are activism.
Tyler,
You
I'm
are,
looking at this
you,
article with stuff. I'm calling bullshit on these numbers. Someone's Facebook. There's no way they can have 72% population as trust factor, and Apple at the very bottom. Something's up with this. This is
yeah,
bullshit.
I
This
want
does
to. I
not
want to
match
actually
any
say
other.
direct. Oh wait, sorry, I didn't know you were still
As it's
speaking.
saying that this does not match any other data set, informal thing in industry, out of industry. I'm calling bullshit. Something's fishy about this article.
No, the Washington Post is owned by
And I
Google,
totally
so
agree.
anything that there's going to be an obvious slant in that sense perspective.
Yeah, and I agree
my
with
point.
that totally. Like, I saw the article and I saw who it was by, and I was like, there isn't a real person who done this exam because, in the first instance, if you just have great or bad, that's not necessarily a survey that is worth its salt, regardless of whatever anybody says.
So
It is leading in most of the questions.
what percent do you think said that government should do more to regulate?
So one
What
of the
was the
things
last
that
question?
that I think about, Tyler, and this is Matt, back to the way you open up this whole discussion is as part of the subtext underneath regulation between where we are as a company or as a country and trust. There's no education, so I think a lot of people, working people, stay-at-home moms, whatever it is, across the board, I don't think they have an education on how a DMP, a data management platform, works. They don't understand cross-device stitching. If they understood the technology, and I do believe that, where you were going is, yeah, the journalism is leading the witness to a desired outcome that was already planned before.
Right.
But I think the missing opportunity that we have is we're not doing any education on how do they, and most people, I know that talking about technology to your significant others, if they're not in the business, is a great cure for insomnia. But I think you have to have that education. So you actually remove the bias from journalism to do some education. This is how Facebook does it. This is how Twitter does it. This is how Apple does it, right? And there's different degrees of trust, which we talked about two or 3 days ago. If you have that understanding, I think you can look at journalism with a little bit more of a critical and educated point of view.
Right. So here's my point. Thank you for that.
Okay, Tyler, did
You,
you see at the bottom of the chart the error margin is plus and minus 4%? That means the number for Apple could be either 40% or 44% or 44 to 48%.
yeah.
Plus, the sample size has a disparity between the actual number that is stated and the actual number that is used in the graph. So, this data is really questionable.
Yes.
Thank
Well,
What
you,
was the sample size?
for even deep in it.
Yes, there are
1,000
two different number of sample
1,000
sizes, and
U.S.
the
internet
sample size
users.
is so
That's
small.
not
This is
enough.
not
I
significant
know it's not
study.
enough.
Yeah,
If they recruited this over the internet, especially if they basically pull it from like that is too, especially for internet focused questions, that is way too easy to basically
My
bias
point
that sample size.
here's my
No,
point.
the thing is that the
Aram,
data, like the
Aram,
way the study is done, is totally wrong, not reliable, and it's just fake. I mean, I'm saying if anybody who knows how data is collected and studies done, this is not even reliable study.
here's my strong point that I want to make. That not only are they delivering a message that most Americans say government should do more to regulate how the internet companies handle privacy, specifically about data tracking around marketing of ads, because that's the narrative that they create in this article. Oh, what an interesting coincidence that is precisely what is killing you as their competitor. Precisely.
There's conflict of interest. There's blood in the
There's a
water on this.
huge conflict
Yeah.
of interest in reporting this as if it's being neutral journalism when it's absolutely economic jihad agenda journalism. And so much so that I wouldn't be surprised if the link that led these people to this survey said, "Do you distrust journalism? Take the survey." Or do you
Right.
distrust big tech? Please
That's
take the
exactly
survey.
right.
That's how out of whack this quote unquote journalism is, that I can't even trust. I have to assume that the people who did this survey clicked a link saying, "Do you distrust big tech? Please take this survey."
yeah, and that's
And the
like the
fact
main
that the
crux of the
piece
article.
itself has a different number, the statistics, the data, the graph itself has a different number. When you have this kind of contradiction in terms of numbers, that means your data is not accurate. Plus, the way the result is written between Apple and Google, it could be easily reversed and the results could be
All right,
opposite.
all right. Just
Yeah,
for people that are more technologically astute in the audience and actually have a keyboard. I'm on an iPad, so I can't click the button with things. There's a button on the keyboard you can click that will basically give you access to the source on things, so you can see the things that are loaded. I want people. The articles on here are saying big tech is basically calling privacy on everything and basically listening when you don't consent to it. Someone pull up the trackers on this page. How many fucking trackers from the companies that they're criticizing right now are embedded on the page that are loaded when you load this article? I'm tired of seeing this on every article criticizing big tech that is financially tied to it. This is
listen, wait, let's go because I only did an eye shot at the questions, right? And Aaron like made such a great point. But if you go to the comment section of that article,
I just did.
you would see everybody just saying it's bullshit.
Well, not only
it's
that,
And
frustrating
I
because we
found it
need
hilarious.
legitimate criticisms. We do need well-informed,
I
very
agree.
cogent criticisms and breakdowns and basically analysis of how to move forward. This is not it. We need something a
More,
lot more
more,
well-informed.
more importantly, we need our legacy media who, like the Washington Post, who definitely ride on the hard work of the people who built that brand. And because it's still taken as truth and it's still taken as journalism, and these are glimpses of the fact that they have cashed all that in. And that's truly regrettable because now everything that I read there, I must read. And more importantly, we've lost another one of there's not an endless supply of these legacy brands, and they're
Hey, magical surprise! The most trusted thing on the survey ends up being Amazon, which owns the Washington Post here. Uh, I mean, magical surprise that it happens to favor the business interests at the base of the paper here on 5 different axes. Here we've got the advertisers that are bloated on the page that aren't basically announced. Well, they're on the page that they're criticizing the privacy factor. We have essentially the ownership of the journal. We have essentially the financial interest of the fact that their advertising base is competing with that. We have essentially the oncoming regulation, the partnership that they have with the academic stuff, I'm looking at it right now, is literally right across. It's in DC. It's just literally they're influencing the regulation of something that affects them directly. There is so much fucking conflict of interest of this. This is absurd.
Yeah. So
Can I add something, please?
please
Wait, this was a this is
hold on, Demolator. Ladies first. There. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Tyler. I was just wanting to add that, most people reading these newspapers and these headlines, whether it's tabloids or broadsheet, they don't look into the detail. They don't dig as deep as people in this room might. They don't need to make sure that the numbers add up, that it's the right kind of survey or not. And the legacy newspapers, as well as the tabloid papers, know very, very well that people are just going for the headlines. So that is the problem we've got. And I don't know how we resolve that. But if people aren't bothering because they haven't got the time, they're not inclined, they're not interested, whatever, and they're only interested in the headlines, then I'm afraid these sort of headlines will rule. And the fact that government or authorities need to follow the big tech companies or technology in making sure that they achieve some level of ethical work it is by the by. People just don't know that they need that. And how does government get to know that that's what we need to be doing without these scaremongering newspaper headlines?
Privacy is fucking important, but if their regulators are using this sort of level of competence to basically inform them of what the public is thinking, or using this to basically bias or shape the regulation, they're going to aim it wrong. Specifically, they're aim it wrong in a way that basically works out to certain groups' interest. And this really infuriates me because we've been having these headlines for years. And then before that, when we weren't having headlines, we had essentially regulators that were asleep at the wheel. We have had this stuff happen for so long. And now essentially now it's saying we should do something. All right, what do you like to do? Wait, you're just going to propose something that literally just basically resets the clock back to something when you basically had a little bit more power? This is not the way to move forward.
So, Chris, I read a
It's a
study
great way
that
of pointing out it's a good perspective. And I think the other thing is, it was mentioned maybe yesterday, is we're growing into the expectations of the CFO, right? So from a talent resignation of the great, talent divide with 68% of people looking for work. Now the head of HR is in charge of the company. In terms of revenue, the CFO is in charge of the company. To the downside, they have to grow into the lower expectations of commercial real estate from work from home. From a social media platform, on a personal level, you probably don't go to the car wash. Somebody mobile comes to you. So the business model for delivery services has completely changed. At the CFO level, I think for some of these social media platform companies, they've grown into this sort of sugar hive. I've got to go after clicks and likes, and the political biases are definitely there on both sides. But I think this whole CFO conversation is like, well, where do I go now? I can't reset the clock to go back. I can only go forward. So I just think it's a point in time that it's very curious and interesting to study what the trends are today and where they're going in the future.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the next article
Can I point out one quick thing? This article actually it's the post it's a post from the Washington Post, but the original title from the Washington Post is Americans widely distrust Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram,
Mm-hmm.
and 925 Mac
Did
totally
someone get tickets to
changed.
the
Yeah,
recent Apple event or
changed.
something?
It totally changed the focus because it's changed to trust Apple more than Google and Amazon. But originally, actually, the poll shows, the top three is Facebook and TikTok and Instagram. So
Which company you throw under the bus can have a lot of effect on advertising revenue.
yeah. So I think that's something. Maybe you should let change the focus there.
Okay. Oh, you know what I just noticed? I gotta try and switch over to my Wi-Fi on my Twitter on my iPhone. So hopefully I don't drop the Twitter Space room while I switch over to Wi-Fi on my phone. I know
the
that.
sound might just buckle a bit, but it shouldn't
All right.
affect the
All right.
spaces.
Well, fingers
Very
crossed.
minor point about great resignation with things. It's very bizarre companies saying, "Oh, we can't find people." When you have this is was Reddit yesterday with 600. Someone basically visualized the typical job application process. 670 applications with stuff, and essentially they got 3 callbacks. As a thing. This is for a software engineer. Check the sources on things, but yeah, the thing about it is I think it's less that we have a lack of supply or lack of workers, etc. I think it's more the same thing that's leading to bagel shops in New York hoarding cream cheese, or essentially like supply chain disruptions elsewhere. The current system we have is not being effective at allocating resources. I don't think it's because the resources are lacking in existence or we lack trained workers. I think it's just our current management infrastructure is incompetent at managing it, and we set up a structure that was not resilient enough to handle these sorts of events. So,
But
anyways,
also to add to that, it's the hiring process. It's all those automated hiring processes now. Those
oh, it's bullshit.
they don't get anybody through. That's the problem. So
So check
there's a
out.
huge stopgap there.
Let's jump into the next one because the next one's pretty juicy. It's from Reuters, so at least we can believe it for the time being, because they've yet to turn themselves into join the clickbait crowd. It says China regulator suspends cybersecurity deal with Alibaba Cloud. And there's way more than meets the eye in the story. Chinese regulators on Wednesday suspended an information sharing partnership with Alibaba Cloud over accusations that it failed to promptly report and address a cybersecurity vulnerability. Alibaba Cloud did not immediately report vulnerabilities in the popular open source logging framework Log4j that we've been reading this headline for a week now. This is one of the
tech behind that is absolutely hilarious how in depth that is. It affects everything.
Right. So this is being used all over the web, and everyone's rushing to fix it. And because this is in the actual programming language of Java, and it's a Java class that a lot of people use in writing apps for the web, it's vulnerable, and that creates a vulnerability into all over the web.
I think it was like 10 or 20% of libraries are affected, and this is extra bad because most programmers use many different libraries when they use their stuff. And when you start saying libraries that use other libraries lose other libraries for something that's very low level like this, it basically hits everything.
So in response, the Ministry of Information Technology, who's in charge of this issue in China, suspended a partnership with Alibaba Cloud regarding cybersecurity threats and information sharing platforms to be reassessed in 6 months and revived depending on the company's internal reforms. Here's where it gets crazy. The latest measure highlights Beijing's desire to strengthen control over key online infrastructure and data in the name of national security. The Chinese government has asked state-owned companies to migrate their data from private operators such as Alibaba and Tencent to state-backed cloud system by next year.
Apple has signed similar deals.
That's the interesting revelation there. And I said this was coming, that these state sovereign clouds were coming. Those who join us every day know exactly what I'm talking about. And the states are going to force China, as usual, is going to be ahead of the curve with these things because they understand it before everybody else, because they're freaking paranoid, and that forces them to act before everybody else. And eventually the others will do it and pretend that they're not doing it out of paranoia or control. They're doing it for other reasons that they'll come up with. But nonetheless, you're going to see this sovereign cloud. The state wants to own the cloud that all the data is on.
Tyler,
yes,
I DM you the South China Morning Post version. It actually says it's suspending work with Alibaba Cloud as a cybersecurity threat intelligence partner for 6 months.
Yes.
Yep.
There's an interesting argument, especially with like Nicholas using on a regular basis about self-sovereign identity stuff, and that's a longer topic, but there is an argument to be made that nations should have some sort of like protected internet that basically functions for basic civic functions. It'd be interesting, like we're used to the idea of the tech giants running everything. It's kind of interesting if we travel back in time to the 90s. What would have happened if the post office essentially, instead of being basically strangled and basically sold off for parts essentially for their innovation groups, what happens if they'd done the same thing they'd done turn of the century where they're doing everything from rockets, pneumatic tubes, and everything, and they're at the forefront of advanced communication technologies? What would have happened if the post office got into email, data servers, etc.? There's alternate history that could have happened there. What's interesting about this is that there is still an opportunity to do something like this. If the post office got involved with banking and such, like Sanders is wanting to do with things, there would be basically a very natural transition to a fintech type kind of setup. Whether or not we can competently manage that at the same time as we're dismantling a lot of our infrastructure domestically at USA is questionable. But it's interesting to see other countries essentially that have less of a legacy and less existing interests that they have to basically satisfy. When they can basically do a clean slate, they're basically operating with a much freer hand in these regards. So it's interesting seeing how those pathways that they choose to develop on policy for tech.
I think there's another interesting point hidden in this article, which is these vulnerabilities can, of course, China's correctly paranoid that they will be penetrated and taken advantage of by non-Chinese bad actors, right? And them being paranoid and understanding that implies that, well, it's I'm trying to think of the funny children's version of you thought of it, so you must have been the one thinking of it. There's several languages that employ this simple concept that the person who's the most paranoid is the one who's likely to also be the bad
You
actor.
thought of it, but you said it.
Right. So the implication is China is very consciously sensitive to this issue because they themselves might be taking advantage of it elsewhere. So anyway, but I think that's a safe assumption because they're hacking all the time anyways. That's just kind of
One's not entirely unrelated, but it is kind of unrelated. A news headline from and Saturday morning trying to post. Sorry, I'm a little sleep deprived here, so sorry if my language is a little off. But China's latest crackdown on religious ban targets foreigners from spreading church and religious content online. The reason why this is relevant is apparently now essentially if you want to basically broadcast any religious service or anything, this includes live streaming, you take out your phone, you start recording something. If you do so without a license from the state religious commission, you essentially have some pretty harsh penalties now with things. And apparently this also has a unique application with foreigners for any sort of religious content. Now, the reason why this is a little bit extra interesting is when we have a lot of these tech platforms spreading, a lot of them are spread from more of an agnostic or more of an atheistic tech kind of position. When you start seeing things like religious rights starting leaning on payment processors and such, where essentially, it's a continuous thing in American politics where you start seeing more of that aspect leaning into things. It'll be interesting when you start seeing these alternative platforms spin up, if that starts to be perceived at a nation state level as being another avenue for basically spreading culture aspects and might be a threat to nation state securities. It's interesting because China has a paranoia about this. This is admittedly a smaller trend, but going back to Boxer Rebellion and other things, they're very, very sensitive about anything along these axes. So it's fascinating seeing how that history shapes the current policy.
So there's a.
Can you imagine? Sorry, Tyler. Can you imagine what would have happened in China if so many people who wanted to follow religious services, let's say Catholic masses and so on during lockdown, there were so many of them online that it would have been really, really quite a substantial form of so-called propaganda from the outside world if the Chinese population were actually able to tune into those things online. So maybe that's what they're sort of protecting against in that thing you mentioned there, Chris, the article. China is so paranoid. There's such a lack of trust in what other people are doing because of what it could do to them that they are doing these things, and yet they're also the ones who are probably using the very same platforms that they have to infiltrate other countries' sovereign information, knowledge, movements, and so on. And so, where are you as another nation? You've got to figure it out and protect yourself too. But there's so little strategic thinking and forward thinking in Western countries that China moves ahead so fast in these areas because of the lack of trust and paranoia. It leaves us behind and it's catching up. One thing I was thinking about while you were all talking was, here in the UK, especially in Scotland, it has not been possible to get technically advanced, competent platforms to even have the NHS properly computer competent across all its service and areas. That every time there is a huge amount of money thrown at the NHS to get it fully updated computer-wise, computer systems-wise, it falls flat because it cannot be completed in time. It's hugely expensive, and it's not possible. Certainly in Scotland, we don't have a linked up system for the NHS information services and platforms. It's really quite ridiculous for something, one branch of our system cannot be computerized competently for the 21st century. But sad, really.
Okay, so then the tweet I just pinned to the top of the clubhouse room is from Kevin Collier, who's a reporter for NBC News on cybersecurity issues. And he says about this whole issue that there's one major irony here, out of several to choose from, is that when he asked China for a comment about all of this, on the fact that about the reports that Chinese hackers were taking advantage of this log4j bug, the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C. indignantly noted that it was China that flagged this issue for the world in the first place, which is patently false because it was the team at Mojang, the makers of Minecraft, who discovered this and popularized it. And
Tyler, I thought it was someone from Alibaba Research.
that's not what my sources show.
What were this?
What?
What, Tyler? It's something you said something to do with Minecraft. That people
Yeah,
over at Minecraft found this.
correct. Mojang, the company behind Minecraft.
That's
It's
awesome.
owned by Microsoft. But I think the researcher that found it was a guy in Alibaba.
We can compare sources. So,
Sure.
okay, the next one is a continuation of yesterday's top headline from Bloomberg that Jack Dorsey's tweet sparks uproar. You don't own Web3. VCs and their LPs do. It will never escape their incentives. It's ultimately a centralized entity. And as I said, one of the interesting evolutions that has come out of this thus far is a friend of mine who's quite notable in the space shared a tweet that he follows a Twitter account that it's a bot Twitter account that tracks who is following and unfollowing who of major tech players. And it Jack Dorsey, shortly after this exchange that he's having, unfollowed the CEO of Coinbase and their main investor, which is Mark Andreessen from who, by the way, is the biggest investor of all in Web3. So take that for what it's worth. Yeah.
I
I
think it
think
has a
that's
lot.
childish.
It has a lot to do with the fact that most of the blockchains, decentralized servers, a lot of them are running on web Amazon services or other cloud platforms to host the nodes that power the validation of these blockchains. And so until you can get away from that and kind of have individual machines in people's houses or a way to decentralize that the validator operation, you're going to continue to have bigger players essentially underneath kind of control that component. And that's essentially it, bottom of the line what
Yeah,
I think it's getting to.
and everyone is basically like either a vendor. Actually, they're not really vendors. They're more like people who have tiny stands and are peddling on Amazon or something like that. And that's not to dismiss them, but the matter of fact is that these decentralized places or stores are not decentralized at all. And Nike buying Refract or something isn't a big move for your NFT. It's a big move for centralization. So, and people were like, "Oh, they're here. It's cool. My NFT's got more. Like, it was worth more even now." But reality stands that it's centralized.
So Abdallah Musa, you have your hand up in your bio. Says you're into NFT, so feel free to jump in as everyone else is. And then I imagine, Ben, you must have enjoyed this exchange, and I imagine you particularly liked Mr. Dorsey's point in this.
Ben's on the phone.
Okay. What's your take on this, MA?
I just am really seeing how like some of the Web3. I agree with. Was that Corey that was speaking? I'm not sure. I recognize some of the voices, but not
Yeah.
all. But I think that was Corey. I think the challenge is that Web3 is. I mean, it's like 50-50, Tyler, because remember how he's always been dreaming of this. And he's really, in some ways, I feel like he's turning into like a hardcore Bitcoin maximalist. And I really believe that that's also why he's given those awards to those four scholars, those four fellows.
Yeah.
Did you see that tweet that he gave an award to 4 fellows to make the Bitfund Trust?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think he's got a deeper strategy going on. I mean, I've
Yep.
always said that. I think he has a much bigger play going on, and yes, he's ranting over this, but I also believe we're going to be in a state of hybrid decentralization and centralization because, quite frankly, the large files of the optical files or media files, it'd be very difficult to store them in a decentralized manner. So
Mm-hmm.
that's, I think, also part of why Web3 is going to be a challenge for some sectors, especially if they have to do with large files. Is that file storage is not going to be cheap. So I think this is where he
You
also could
can
be saying as well.
Okay, file storage
the
is only
lessons we got
expensive.
from so
Oh,
the lessons we learned from like BitTorrents and stuff is that large files can be spread across many peers, and we can actually accelerate the process of getting these files by actually spread them out over a bunch of folks.
yeah, I've run the numbers on this. Like, so data compression is something I spent a lot of time on. Short version is we don't even really try. Frankly put, one of the things is that if you know how to code efficiently, if you know how to be disciplined with your data structures, you can pull off this absolute wonders. Part of the thing with the NSO group that was so impressive about Pegasus, they encoded an entire computer compiler in a freaking GIF format that could basically unload itself from something that basically is the amount of space that we send to send like a little dog emoji meme or something like that. The reason why that's very relevant is that we're barely scratching the surface of what compression can offer. Same thing with essentially all these AI techniques. A lot of people don't realize that every AI technique that's using general adversarial networks or neural nets with such, at its core, is basically taking a complex piece of information and shrinking into a much smaller space. That's the core concept behind how latent spaces work. The reason why that's very relevant is that if we were to start now with our current tech stack and the current things that we know of, and we rebuilt the thing from scratch, it would take up a fraction of the space that we currently basically use under the data storage. You're looking at community servers that are like 10 grand or so, and you can serve up the entire internet off of something that's just down the street from you. The thing is that this is not how people are currently thinking. They're currently thinking cover up every bit of data, log everything, all the consumer data we might want to train an AI on it one day. And so the fact that they don't have a well-defined architecture for doing this in place means that it's the better, safer, sorry, despite the toxic liabilities with privacy and cybersecurity, etc. So we built this stuff like shit because that's the thing that gets VC valuations and generates impressive headlines and impressive all these other things that make Wall Street and VCs happy. The thing is, if you actually build the data architectures for what we know the capabilities of the platforms can be, you would result in a very different architecture. This has nothing to do with technology. This has to do with business decisions that are made years ago. So if we want to basically create a platform for the future, we should have all the options on the table, not just the ones that are politically convenient in the current tech stack.
Chris is
I think
spitting right now.
just just on that quickly. I think Amade's correct. I mean, I think Chris, you're correct as well. But that doesn't necessarily just touch on the decentralized point. I mean, I think the the challenge still becomes if you want decentralized content, then you're going to need to get away from servers that are owned by a company. Because if at the end point the server is owned by an individual or an entity, then we're not talking about decentralized content as well as the actual methods for delivery. I'm aware of
It,
one company that on chain is building a solution for doing very large file sizes, so like kind of Netflix level streaming, which is a company called Alluvio, who came out of they built a technology called Aspera, which was bought by I want to say IBM, but it was basically the technology that took the movie studios off of shipping everything around on hard drives and actually took them digital. And so that's been built and that's out of LA, kind of launched this year. That's quite interesting. I mean, it's worth having a look. I mean, Chris, you might get a kick out of the technology, but I
it,
mean, basically
it,
they're able to actually store stuff
it's
on
worth
chain and deliver it content wise.
it's worth expanding the imagination a little bit with things is that when we switched it from analog to digital, one of the big things was that every single piece of bit of information is protected forever, backed up in quadruplicate, and that's the thing. The thing is that older analog processes had a much more graceful handling of lossy information, and the reason why this is really, really freaking important is that if we had better understanding of that and better characterizations of where noise can actually be useful, the reason why this is very relevant. Imagine essentially like a little SD card about the size of your thumb that holds petabytes of information. And because of hyper efficient protocols, you can store, like, say, the internet and all the parts that you would ever click on for the rest of your lifetime on a single, basically, physical device. As an example of essentially some way that this could look, Cerebus was a company that basically recently made a bunch of headlines because they have a fancy cooling technology, some copper blocks they have, and they say, look, we're doing a full wafer right here. And we've got the cooling system to go with it. For rather than divide up the chip into a bunch of tiny little parts, we have all the thing dedicated to active processing. So it's got like a frac ton of processing power. And then they also have some algorithms so it doesn't melt the thing when it turns on. But the reason why it's relevant is that's currently devoted to processing power. If that same chip manufacturing capability was turned to memory, you're looking at a single box that can store the entire thing. And I don't think people really understand the implications of how much replication there is, how much duplication, and how much of that data is actually used versus how much of it people are hanging on for just in case. And the reason why it's really relevant is that we are massively misunderstanding essentially the ramifications of what is technologically underpinning many of these tech companies' decisions on when they build a data server, where they build the data server, who owns the data, how much does it cost, how much do you need to fund your startup. We are really, really, really underestimating the capability of how much these platforms can change in a short period of time. And the first groups that take advantage of this are going to reshape the language that we're using to basically talk about these subjects. So I'm just saying that these conversations start set in stone. They will change radically in the near future when groups start taking advantage of some of these technologies.
I
Still
think
speaking.
you should definitely check out Alluvio. A lot of the architect stuff they were talking about and things they've built out under the hood come from a very similar point. They're talking about very, very similar things. Michelle Munson, who set it up, like she talks about very similar stuff, or did certainly in the beginning of it.
Shoot me a link.
So definitely, yeah. I'll shoot you a link straight after this. The
Tyler,
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that we came across yesterday after going through a little bit of the rabbit hole as well, and Gareth, thank you for that. And Chris, like I'm listening to that exchange and I totally could recognize that. The one of the things that did seem a bit odd was the fact that here is someone who's sort of really taking a very hard stand on a side and making some sweeping generalizations about sort of just the whole space, right? So it did become at one point, it felt like he was really attacking heavy. And I was kind of thinking, like, well, maybe we need to just take a sidestep for a moment because we're still in the early stages of navigating through this Web3, Web4 space, right? And, but I do agree with the fact that there's a lot of VC money being thrown at this space. And unfortunately, you still have people that want it quick and easy. And as long as there are people that still want it quick and easy, there'll always be money to be made for the VCs because the VCs usually, you know, in my understanding, they go in, they find an idea, they sort of extrapolate it, they get a huge percentage, but then they simplify a process. And once again, you are now the consumer. Do you see what I'm saying? Like once again, like for example, there's a company that just got funded out of this app a few months ago by A16Z. Is it? Is that A16Z? And that's the one. Tyler, am I saying the VC fund properly?
Yep.
And they were funding basically a platform to rapid application develop smart contracts. And I'm like, well, wait a second, people. Whoa, 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 whoa. You're now rapidly developing smart contracts that, in essence, for them to be equitable, they have to be audited as well. But if you make them turnkey, that means that you make people reliant on your company to help you get those basic contracts, right? And it's really interesting because they're going after the creator economy. That's like to me, that's what I've read, that they've targeted that niche of the creator that doesn't really have the technical know-how, but wants it because they see that they could get it done quick and it's coming from a creator. And it's, so they're not really seeing that they're going back into the lion's mouth. You know what I'm saying? Because at the end of the day, if you want decentralization, you've got to be recognizing that decentralization is going to come with some growing pains.
It would be
I
Well,
think
worth. Sorry, go
and
on.
at the same time, it's like knowing where the vertical goes and leads. Like most of us are consumers at the end of the day, and we constantly use things that other people built because it's just easier for us. So, and we don't have the time, like just psychologically and economically and lifestyle wise. We don't have the time for all of that.
Yeah, I don't think that's everyone though.
So
I don't think that's everyone,
no,
but I do
it's
agree with you.
most people. I'm gonna say
Yeah,
98% with my heart and soul because that's the reality.
I
And
Not
not
think when
not
you
everybody isn't gonna make another Clubhouse app,
no, I
but
think when
maybe
you
2 people will, maybe 5 people will, but not
yeah, but
10
this is
people, not
interesting.
100 people.
There's
And that's
about
the same with what I want to say is simply not everybody's going to build their own stores. Not everybody's going to learn how to code in for blockchain, and not everyone's going to learn Python even. Not everybody is going to know what n log n means, and that's fine sometimes.
but
However,
this is what Jack is talking about though. This is what Jack is alluding to. He's basically making a philosophical statement, Tyler, that people are just, with all due respect, too damn lazy to learn something. And the reality is you're going to have to pay the piper, and you're going to be the
it's
the
it's
chooser of
not
how you're going to pay the
laziness.
piper.
It's
People
not
are
laziness
overwhelmed. The
though,
number
is
of
it?
hours of days you have for survival right now is more constrained. Rent is essentially at 34% of incomes for most Western democracies. That is not sustainable for even civic engagement, let alone
Yeah.
technological research. We are
For
basically at breaking point. There is no
Yeah,
resilience
for
built into
Jack's
our.
standpoint, he's just a billionaire that's just talking because calling people lazy because they don't want to code is weird. Like,
I don't
he,
I saw Jack speak in Bitcoin conference. I don't agree with that statement.
so like generally I don't like listening to certain people when they say call people lazy. However, the way that we live our lives just doesn't tend towards or trend towards creating our own servers in our own houses. Maybe a
But
hobbyist will,
I get
but
that, but you see, that's very interesting because I was listening to a few people talk in Europe as well, and there's a consensus on a thought that's coming forward, and it's going down the middle, which is that word lazy, if I put it into air quotes, and I think Tyler speaks about this a lot, Tyler, and I think you know what I'm pointing at, is that people are becoming, and I'm going to use your phrase, Tyler, domesticated animals, where like they're expecting things to be done for them in such a way that they don't know how to fix under the hood. And when you said that statement about not everyone has the time to code, I'm sorry, that's just education and learning, but at some point one has to take responsibility for learning. And at some point, if someone's not going to learn it, they're going to pay someone else, and they're going to pay
okay,
more
Wait,
for it.
Ma,
so
how
are
deep do you
you
want to go
going
here?
to do
People can't.
surgery on yourself? Like,
Are you
are
gonna?
you gonna
Yeah, you
learn
need.
what
Ma, are
pharmaceuticals
you?
are
And
like?
how
One
deep
at a
in the
Wait,
time,
can I
stack?
say
because you
can I
can't
say
really hear
something?
when two
Like, I
people are
was speaking
speaking.
and
He's
like
been
I keep getting
interrupted a
cut
lot.
off.
Let him finish his point.
Yeah, like we don't learn certain things because our lives don't need us to learn it. Because we are happy in what we call advanced civilization. Like you're
That's
not gonna
not
make your own.
everyone, though. You have a
Listen,
lot
listen,
of
just
very
listen to me
sad
for a
people,
second.
Let him
dumbass.
finish his point.
Listen to me for a second. You're not gonna make your own sunglasses. You're not gonna make your own computer desk. There's a lot of things that you're not gonna make. You're not gonna make a light bulb filament. A lot of people don't know how to do that, but you still switch a light on. You still flick the switch and get lights
Gemma,
because
go even bring it
that's
into this. That's
life.
why there's no code solutions, Amy. No code and low code. Those people don't even know what's below this. Are you suggesting that everybody should know everything? Is this
Yeah,
okay?
that it's
No,
not. It's not
actually,
gonna
it's not.
happen.
I think I know the better way to frame it is
Whatever.
you're still responsible for all of it. You're responsible
Correct. That's
for
exactly what I'm trying to say, Jennifer, is that regardless of whether you're no code, low code, or high code, there still has to be an understanding of how to navigate it, because then you're basically walking around
You don't. You
expecting
don't. The
people to
no
do it.
code developers do not know and should not be required to know what the operating systems and kernels and the whole base below that. That's not what you know. They're using those solutions because that
Because they're
solution was
making a
built for their
choice.
use.
Correct. But
How can
Jennifer,
so
they're making a
like you're talking
choice.
about
Can
making
I jump in?
They're
I
making a
massive?
think
choice.
Jennifer, the
Wait, can
no
I
code,
just?
that
Anyway,
if you are talking about, I think technical people not trying to know, the coding, yes. But if you are talking about the layman people, just the everyday average people, even no code, I have been trying to learn that. Even no code, you need to understand basic logic so that you know the workflow and how the database works behind the scene.
But
So you don't
but you
need to
didn't code the
code, but
kernel or
you
the operating
still
system under
need
that. So
to
how deep
you
is
still
Amy
need to
going?
understand the
like I'm
How
Can
pretty
I can
sure
I jump
most.
in?
I would I would like to finish at least one point on this topic, but I just want to say like I'm pretty sure most of us understand how this app works, but we aren't going to make a closed network solution for our friends and family to use an app like this because the reality is we don't have the time, and they won't be the ones who um use the solution, which is speaking to voice on with many people, right? They won't use the solution to the fullest ability. And some people work for the world, and they're custodians of such, and a lot of them need guidance, because absolute power corrupts absolutely, or whatever the phrase you want to put in there is. But as humans, we regulate each other because that's what we should do, or else everything could be out of whack. But to say stuff like sweeping statements, in fact, and say stuff like, "Oh, you're lazy if you don't do this, and you're lazy if you don't do that." I understand if it's like farming, or understanding that an animal may allow you to have meat, but when we start talking about building whole architectures that takes thousands of pounds, thousands, like I don't know how a lot of how much a graphics card costs, like a real one, like one of the beastie ones. But it's not everyone's going to create Unreal Engine 5, and that's okay. But there's a real reason for that as well, because
Yeah, I
if you see
just
where the vertical goes, if we start talking about chips and how to make a fab, then you're out of the loop. And then if you even talk about cars, let's not even talk about chips, let's just talk about making a car. You're never going to be able to do that.
I've got
So
a good
it's fine.
I've got a few
I
thoughts.
just want to say, to cut my point off and finish my rant or whatever. I think it's fine that a lot of us don't know how to make a drone or build a car, or we need a mechanic because we don't know how to change a tire, because that is the way that things are built. We want a service, someone else is a professional at that, and we pay for that service. That's it.
yeah, if I
So I
can
think
just add, our whole economic system is built. It's working, and our whole future is building upon the principle that we have constant growth. Without constant growth, we cannot pay for all of the stuff we want to develop new, and then welfare and all the stuff that we rely upon for the future. So for constant growth, you need constant efficiency, like increasing efficiency, and you cannot really increase efficiency if you need constantly people that have very generalized knowledge, because this will take way too long. If a doctor that wants to make like an app that has something to do with healthcare needs to also learn all the coding, it will be impossible to have the pace of growth that we constantly need, because it needs to be increasing. Like also the pace and the growth itself needs to be increasing, and at more and more faster pace. So it's very ideologically, like I have also the ideological thing, people should be generalized in their knowledge, but to have a deep understanding of every single thing you use and you want to build something on, it's that's not really how we can keep this growth. And we need faster innovation at a faster pace for humanity, with a growing increase of the need of resources, especially if we really want to realize the meta stuff. NVIDIA gave out the article that we don't have the power, like the electric. We cannot meet electric needs and the need for data storage and processing and so on. So if we really want to achieve all this stuff and constantly innovate for humanity to survive and have growth, then we cannot have that everyone needs to learn everything.
Tyler,
so
I did a room,
Exactly.
I've got a few
real quick, this
thoughts
will
on
take
it.
20 seconds. Tyler, you remember how I did a room on 100 solutions for climate change because things got a little lively and I just did like an info
Yes.
dump with things? I'm
Yeah.
really tempted to do one around here for post scarcity tonight on how to make everything. It's not as complicated as people think it is. You break it down to base commodities, work out three levels of the supply chain.
Exactly.
There are groups that specialize in this,
Correct.
and it would be a very informative one because I feel a lot of people are talking past each other because we're working past different perspectives and different knowledge states, and I think bringing that essentially into a shared information space will be very helpful.
Okay. Yeah, I would say do it. We'll probably be done at the top of the hour. It's my guess.
Okay, we might do a breakout room then.
Okay.
Yes, Tyler, actually, I was
Go ahead
gonna
quickly,
tell you in
Matthew.
the back channel.
Go ahead.
The Tech News Africa starts at 9. Thank you.
Oh, at the top of the hour as well. Okay, great.
I
So
think there are a few really valid points here. A couple of thoughts, Tyler.
go ahead, Ben.
I don't know if my connection's going to be good enough, Tyler.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
It's a little on and off.
Yeah.
I'll have a go and I'll give up if it doesn't work. So, a couple of thoughts. I think one of the driving factors behind constant growth is that we're spending money that doesn't exist yet. So, we need to a little bit think about the way that works. And then the other thing is that I totally agree with the point about you're not going to do surgery on yourself. So, there is a point at which specialization is clearly helpful. Whether as a species we need to advance as fast as we are to escape disasters like natural disasters, that's an interesting question. I don't know the answer. We probably do need to keep advancing. But then right back down on a ground level, there are things you can choose to do if you want. I mean, I just happen to be uh, setting up a home server, something called Home Assistant. It's an open source system at the moment. As a hobby, I'm kind of retired, so I'm doing it as a hobby, which means I take control of all my data of everything in the house. I get a lot more functionality than I would before. I can stop that data going to other people, and everything works better than it did before. So I think being able to understand what you're dealing with and make decisions based on that. If you just go buy some IKEA lights and then you buy some Hue light bulbs and you stick them in and you don't realize that's two Zigbee networks competing with each other, and then you wonder why they don't work properly, and then you boost your Wi-Fi, which makes it worse because it's on the. If you don't know these things, you get yourself in a real pickle. So either kind of hire a specialist or like learn it deeply enough yourself to not get stuck. But I think there's a middle ground where you can get really murky where you're either hiring poor specialists or not knowing enough about it yourself. So a few interesting topics there to listen to.
Can I quickly chip in?
Go
On
quickly.
the on Ben's and Chris's point, I think we have to look at the whole ecosystem. The ecosystem was sort of like it started with the Yahoo free email, and everybody actually jumped on it. So that because it's free, and we are talking about this discussion is happening for like 2% of the whole ecosystem or 1%. The rest of the people are actually interested in free stuff, free Gmail, free Yahoo email, free Alexa. Alexa is being subsidized for the people. They get this device in the home. They don't care. Basically, what we've been discussing about here, 98% of them. And also, this ecosystem has a major element of the VC money pouring in. So, for instance, if you look at the Uber model, Uber is it's like a leak in the bottom of the bucket. So you keep pouring in the money, which is going to be ultimately, you're not going to make the money because it's going to actually go through, it's going to leak through. But ultimately, because the flow is so humongous, that leak doesn't matter. So you're never going to be able to actually make money or recover the money, but they're going to capitalize on the data itself. So something needs to be done on the point where these VCs going to actually keep on making money and the startups are going to keep on making money. So when you say that we're going to go towards the decentralization of the whole product cycle, then ultimately these guys will lose interest in that. And once they do, where the money is going to come from, how they're going to make more money on that. So we have to pay attention to that when the VC writes a check, they actually have the understanding that you're going to be spending about 25 to 30% of the amount is going to go towards the advertising, which is going to be ultimately being spent in the cycle, in the ecosystem itself. So you're going to be spending on the Facebook marketing, you're going to be spending on Instagram, on Twitter and all that. And that money is going to be recycled. So when we're going to have like a major portion of it is going to be going towards the decentralization, and the DAO is going to come into effect, how these VCs is going to be thinking. Are they going to still pouring in the money for the new startups to actually come in and all the innovation? So ultimately the innovation would stop if we're not going to give them the data. So that's another angle I think we have to pay attention to.
I wouldn't
Thank you.
underestimate the amount of innovation a single person can do from there. A lot of things are born from small incremental innovations. And the more people who work at that level, as well as from the top level down, I think the more that can happen. What I'm concerned about is people not being able to see things for what they are. I use an iPhone. It's super expensive for what it is, probably better off with an Android, but I like the ecosystem. I'm happy to do that. But sometimes people pay an absolutely absurd amount more. If you look at what some things, I was going to put some lights in the kitchen. So like de facto would be go get more Philips Hue stuff, £250 for a bunch of uplights. When I looked at what that actually consists of, a lump of LED strip and a Zigbee controller, it's about £25 of stuff, 10 times less expensive to do it yourself, and not much quicker to be honest, to buy it straight from you. So in terms of just having some x-ray eyes to look through what things are and then make a decision. Yes, I'm being ripped off for an iPhone, but overall I feel it's worth it with the service and everything else. So I will buy that. But no, I won't, spend £250 on an LED strip that I know what it is when you break it down. I just think we need to equip ourselves with a little bit of knowledge about where our data is, how it's stored, how it moves, what the physical things around us are, what they actually cost, how cheap some of these actual components are, and then making more informed decisions about which direction to go. And also, to Tyler's point, have some ability to fix it when they go wrong. And this is all while the power works. What happens when the power goes out and we need to make our own food and all the rest of it? To your point, Tyler, I'm concerned about that for people, inability to fix these layers of complexity.
Okay, so we got to run through because we're going to try and end at the top of the hour. The next article is
just real quick on the last one. I scheduled a spin-off room with things.
Okay.
I don't know how that conflicts with the Tech Africa thing, but we'll do another one later on.
Okay. It's from the BBC that the UK's ad regulator has now banned 2 new ads by the football team Arsenal for promoting its fan token, saying that the soccer club failed to illustrate the risks of the investment. A webpage and Facebook post by Arsenal Football Club promoting crypto-based fan tokens broke advertising rules. Anyone with a hot take on that? I invited the CEO of the company behind the fan token, because Arsenal didn't make their own token. They're using Socios's token, which Alexander joined me here in Tech News Around the World and pitched that when we had our crypto special, if you guys remember that back in, I don't know, when August was that?
Forever ago.
Yeah. And so the CEO of that company came in and he even hinted that many of the big football clubs were going to start adopting his fan token. And indeed they have. And he's making an absolute progress with that. And now the UK's ads regulator is saying that the football club can't promote their fan token. Because
Did you say fan token or scam token?
Fan.
Fan. Yeah, I'm happy that a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, but let's just say this particular case is running into this, because the reality is this isn't the same as what most things are, and there is a risk, and it's understanding that a lot of people who game on Twitch with money are betting with a casino's or at least a company who's owned by a casino's money. It's you need to tell everyone the depths to which this thing goes, or else you aren't really advertising properly. Maybe it's just my culture knowing the UK, but I do believe that people need to be forward, at least companies at least need to be forthwith with their information and say what it is and mean what they say. And that type of regulation, it goes deep and it far. Not something that you would see a lot in an American company, no shade, but that's just what it is. It's you need to understand these things.
It's worth looking at several dynamics about
especially
the sports
kids
business.
These kids are going to be under 21. They see everybody making money off NFTs and you're taking advantage of them. It's like a pyramid scheme. And not saying that the tokens are pyramid scheme, but pyramid scheme takes advantage of the people that really want to make money. And this isn't game cards. You know what you said, but these games companies, they're not like those little game cards that the top trumps or whatever. You get a player's rookie card and all of these things. It's you're paying for something direct and you don't know what the value of it is. You don't know where it's going to go from here. And if you're paying for a card, you're getting a product, but reality stands up until right now, what the laws say today, you're not getting a product. It might change in the future saying digital is product, but for now today, that's not a product.
It's worth considering what Dapper Labs was one of the first in the space. They did the CryptoKitties and such, and one of their early financial backers was NBA for the clips and such. If you look at the history of many different new media forms and technology forms, it has a very intersection with essentially the sports business. Very similar to essentially how porn gets cited a lot as saying, well, if you've got a fintech innovation or something with broadcast media as such, Porn industry is one of the early adopters. Another one to basically pay attention to is sports. One of the reasons is because sports has engagement like nothing else. You just get a bunch of people to basically go at it with each other. Doesn't matter what it is. It could be basketball, hockey, whatever. The key part is that you have regular engagement on a regular basis, and that financially is very lucrative to get early clients on. When you see essentially these sorts of things kick in with sports teams embracing NFTs and such, this forms a foundation for building a whole new set of media establishments that actually have actual revenue in that. It's different from essentially, hey, I've got this cool piece of artwork, this is shiny, have you ever heard of them before, versus this is a long-standing brand that you've basically heard and known and loved, etc., and we're going to cash in on that because we're moving into a new form of like the Web3 version of stuff. So
Yeah.
I would view this as a form of validation for the space of NFTs because this stuff can last for a good long while.
Yeah,
I
in a
think the
way,
issue, as someone who
right?
has a social
But
token on my own on Rally, as a number of
so,
folks here have, the issue is education, and in this case, lack of education, miscommunication, and bad marketing. I don't think there's anything fundamentally wrong with a crypto token for a fan base, particularly in sports. If you look at what Chili's is doing, they're on fire
It's the same
in
one.
enabling
It is Chili's.
sports
It's
teams, yeah,
exchanging.
to engage and build a community of really an economy around the community, and it's a fantastic use case, a very practical one for crypto, where you have merch and special access, even rewarding players, not just fans. But the way it was handled here was obviously quite bad.
The problem with it. Yeah, the
Ahead, Ben.
problem is the same as the problem with multi-level marketing companies. They're a black box for exchanging social capital for money. And you deplete the social capital of you and the people around you selling something you could never sell to a stranger. That's the test. They would never buy your vitamin pill if you're in an MLM because it's too expensive and it does not stand up against what you can buy in a supermarket. You can only sell it to your friends and family. So what you do is you deplete the social capital around you today so that somebody makes a lot of money tomorrow. And that's what's wrong with all of it. Completely unethical.
Well, I wouldn't say all of it's wrong. I think it needs to be regulated and communicated properly as a
Fundamental
social token
structure.
that
first, not an
means that it's
investment, not a
wrong.
cryptocurrency, but as a way to
Fundamental
reward
structure.
fans, to
Evan,
gamify the whole fan experience, to cut the middleman out of merchandise sales, to provide fans with special access, and even
Evan, you're
players can
walking
be
down the street to
compensated through the
buy.
token as well. So as long as it's above board, and in this case it
It's
clearly
not. It's
wasn't,
not.
I think it's a great
It's not a.
opportunity, and
The
I've
whole
got a lot of
system is not
Chili's, and
above board because
it's a fascinating venture.
I
Ben,
think.
yeah, Ben, go on. You.
Sorry, I just think there's a big delay between here and Twitter Spaces. But I had some problems on Twitter Spaces. The whole thing is not okay because it is just a system for sapping social capital from those around you. This is why you cannot sell your thing to somebody that you haven't spent considerable amount of time with. They won't buy it. You walk up to somebody cold and say, buy Evan coin, they'll go, who the fuck are you? Go away. Only people who spent a considerable
But
amount of
that's why
time
I don't
with a
promote
piece
it
of.
that way. I promote it to my
Exactly.
community. I
And just
reward
like
my community.
an
It's a way to gain
just like
access
an
to me and
emulator
to
of
fund projects. And I don't see
emulator of
why it
Discord will
couldn't
have
be
it.
considered the same with someone who's been, an Arsenal supporter for their entire, 4 generations of a family. And, again, you put limits on it. Like you put limits on how much you can buy, you can sell, you put rate limits. It's not designed as an investment. In fact, look at the rally system. Specifically, you cannot position this as an investment. You can not talk about investing, and they're very strict compliance, third-party compliance parameters. So that's it being done right. Clearly, this was not done right.
No,
Tyler, we need some moderation here when we're doing
Yeah,
cross-platform
yeah.
because
yeah.
it
The
makes it
delay is
difficult
too
for
big.
spaces to have the same conversation. So we need you doing traffic control when that happens.
All right.
Yeah, people need to let other people finish their point. Otherwise, there'll be two people on top of each other. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the
No, it's
controls
just
have to
using
be there.
one platform, then there is no delay problem. If you use two platforms at once, that causes the delay problem. Okay, just open one app.
I'm
I
not on
just
both
personally
apps,
use
so I'm
Yeah,
not sure what you want
yeah.
me to do. Not use Spaces, maybe? I don't know.
Sure,
And
Ben.
I mean, don't open Clubhouse and the Twitter Spaces at the same time, and use
No, but
just one
he's running
platform.
it.
No, that
I'm not.
I
that's
think it's okay,
that's
Ben. I think you want to finish your
Yeah. Can
comment.
we have the actual conversation, please?
Don't worry, I'll do it when I've got a better connection. I'm just saying that the reason you have to put limits and everything else on all of this is because it's fundamentally just like the MLMs. It's exactly a ring. The world went from Ponzi, that wasn't okay. So people invented MLMs, which is a product just to cover up the fact that this MLM is just a Ponzi with a product that's overpriced and not worth anything. And then we've moved away from that, and now we've moved into this token space. It's the same thing. It's just a way of depleting the people around you from the social capital built up over the last few years. And what ends up happening is the people who start these things make a lot of money, and thousands or millions of people lose a little bit in the future. And that's inevitable consequence of it. It's just a reverse credit line for sapping social capital out of all the people around.
Yeah, and this isn't like a donation thing, which is what a person, an influencer with a small community would be for, because a community leader or influencer is going to have that community, and they're going to have that community for however long they have their platforms for. But this is a worldwide company grossing billions. Like, top, Arsenal is not some small business. It's not a medium-sized business. It's a worldwide global organization with people and children that love them to bits. Like, it's, the hysteria is crazy, right? Arsenal lose a lot, and a lot of people still support them. But so is the reality is you shouldn't be doing that type of stuff. It's not a thing that a company that size should be doing.
There's
Like,
no
you can't. Yeah,
Sorry, I
yeah.
thought
Go
you
on,
finished, mate. Sorry.
Ben.
I was going to
Yeah,
say there's no
yeah.
criticism or judgment here, though, because the people involved in these systems don't know what the nature of the system is. I got involved in something called Juice Plus, which is a fucking ridiculously overpriced vitamin pill. And I was doing really well. So they invited me over to Switzerland or wherever the hell the factory was to look at the way it was made. And they showed me around and wined and dined me for a couple of days. They thought I was going to be their next hotshot, salesperson. And I sat down at the end. They said, "What do you think of everything?" I said, "Well, it's a complete scam, clearly," which they nearly fell off their fucking chairs in the boardroom. And none of them could see it themselves. They could not see the nature of the thing that they're in. There's no bad intentions inside. It's just that the very structure of those systems is insidious, and that's why they've been regulated and made illegal one at a time. And it's just going to continue from Ponzi scheme to pyramid scheme to MLM to all the tokenization and before that the ICOs and now the tokens. It's just history repeating itself, in my opinion.
So what scenarios would you make legal lawful? Given the trend towards tokenizing everything, we've seen the scams in everywhere from NFTs to shenanigans with ICOs. I mean, is all of this just one big Ponzi scheme, or are there specific use cases
Yeah,
where you
people will
think there's value in
tokenize.
community building through tokens?
People will tokenize what they can tokenize, but there's just some communities that are, let's say, protected in quotes, and some communities that you can't really, and companies that can't do this type of stuff or shouldn't do this type of stuff too. And they have to be very, very transparent, because this whole tokenization thing, a part of it is transparency, right? That is what a lot of people peddle. A lot of influencers are peddling that this is transparency. This is my roadmap. This is my white paper. Blase, blase, blah. This is what you're gonna get from me 2 years down the line, 5 years down the line, right? And a lot of
Exactly,
people
mate.
get rug pulled. So,
Where's the value? It's
anyways,
always delaying the delivery of the actual value. So the vitamin pill company, the MLM, the whole promise, you're very quickly trained not to sell the vitamin pill.
oh, he got rug pulled, but
About the pill will sell itself. The real opportunity is in the business. And then they will, and so then they get excited about the business. So there's this chain of promises that eventually have to collapse, by the way, because the maths is very simple. Oh, just get 10 people involved. And if each of them get 10 people involved, and each of them get 10 people involved, you'll be a billionaire. Yeah, but after 9 levels, we've consumed every human being on the planet. Do the maths. 10 to the power of 9 is a billion. You cannot, it does not work. At some point, that system is going to run out of steam and is going to implode on itself. And all those promises.
So aren't we damning the
the
entire
people who started the
crypto
system are the ones who made
universe,
the money.
or is my misunderstanding the
Yeah,
ultimate underlying issue with coins?
pretty well. That's a different discussion and a discussion for another day. The whole crypto Web3, the reason Jack can see this for what it is because all of these things are built on the premise of decentralization, and nothing except for Bitcoin is decentralized. So they don't have the very premise they're built on. They also suffer from something called the Oracle problem, which for some reason people refuse to Google and understand. But that's a topic for a different day. So I do think there are problems, but I normally don't bother ranting about it. I've got a bit of an attitude to just sit and watch and see what happens, A, with regulation, and B, when the mathematics plays out that so many people are involved and exhausted that it implodes on itself, just watch it do it. It's all cool. It's not.
Yeah, no, it's going to be interesting to watch. Definitely the horse is out of the barn. I mean, every sports team I know of is now dabbling with its own crypto. So good, fascinating times.
Okay, so we got to run through about 20 tweets in 3 minutes. So the first, and I'm tweeting, these are people who tweeted these in, and I'm retweeting them to the Tech News Twitter account. The first one's from Thomas Tong, that poor oral health is linked to a wide variety of diseases and even mental illness. In one of the largest studies of its kind to date in the UK, researchers have found gum disease to be associated with an increased risk of developing cardiovascular. I don't know why I knew that a long time. I knew that 20 years ago. I don't know why it's not common knowledge. Anyway, and even mental illnesses. And there's a startup who just raised separately, totally separate article. A startup just raised millions of dollars for an AI to detect gum disease, which might prevent you from
Are
getting.
they calibrating for socioeconomic factors?
Great question. Because it could be.
If you are growing up in a neighborhood full of lead, yeah, no shit. Essentially, you're going to have issues. Sometimes they don't correct for those properly. They look at zip codes and they say these people have better oral health, and they have less incidence of the other things. So the correlation causation stuff can get a little tricky. I'm not saying that's the case here. I'm just saying that that's sometimes a factor that sometimes it's left out.
Yeah.
Yeah, not to mention the pre-selection bias of people with mental illness having a much more difficult time following a routine such as brushing teeth and oral hygiene. So I haven't read the study, but if they didn't address that issue, this is garbage correlation, but not causation.
I just tweeted it to the Tech News Twitter account. Next
If they
one.
address it in the first page, then we're good to go. I'm just
Well, they are not stating why people have gum disease, right? That's what they are not looking for. I mean, I don't know exactly. I didn't read up into this detail into the study, but they're not arguing that they know where the gum disease comes from. It's just that, it's like playing into this very common field of study now that inflammation leads to chronic inflammation leads to mental health, another type of chronic disease.
So now we've done one article out of the 30, and now we have 1 minute left. Thank you, everybody. So the next one's from Thomas Tong about lab-grown seafood. Is lab-grown seafood the wave of the future? Tweeted that one out. And the FDA just approved the world's first injectable medication to prevent HIV called Apretude. Is an alternative to daily pills for HIV prevention. And there was another one for a vaccine for cancer that I guess is in stage 2 human trials. I'll get to that headline in a second. The CTO of CrowdStrike, one of the major cybersecurity companies, just did a tweet today saying, in the last few weeks, I've become increasingly convinced that the Kremlin has unfortunately made a decision to invade Ukraine later this winter. While it is still possible for Putin to, and by the way, he's Russian, the CTO of CrowdStrike, while it is still possible for Putin to de-escalate, I believe the likelihood is now quite low. Allow me to explain why, and he did a Twitter thread, so I'm tweeting that one out. And Jeff G found this one from The Guardian, that a Harvard professor has been found guilty of hiding ties to Chinese-run recruitment program. And this is no ordinary Chinese-run recruitment program. This is Xi Jinping's program called 1,000 Minds, where they're trying to bring all the smartest people in the world to China. And not a surprise, they're focused on Harvard professors of all kinds. All the top professors of all the top universities are constantly being recruited to come to China and being paid incredibly handsomely if they can, by extension, recruit other brilliant minds back to Ben's MLM scenario. And the problem is this Harvard professor has been found guilty of denying that he's part of this program, as many, many, many of them are. And this is because they're being paid incredibly handsomely. And it's interesting to see this now becoming public.
Hey, Tyler, can I just make a quick point here? Yesterday on Clubhouse, there was a room that ran for many, many hours about the Chinese government basically even taking action against the families of Chinese students that, they're citizens that are being educated here. So they're, international exchange students, that if they were to say something in class, and it even happened at Indiana University, somehow they find out that one of their citizens said something negative about the government in a class in Indiana University, and they retaliated against his parents. And they even had a professor on from Cornell who said he knows that when he teaches kids from China in over there, that he sees the fear in their eyes. He doesn't even call on them. He doesn't want to ask them to make a statement if they don't want, because he knows they're scared should they say something, and it gets back to the government in China because they've got family back there. So I just wanted to talk about that because it was a room in Clubhouse yesterday that lasted many hours. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's another related point, and that is the difficulty in getting H-1B visas for academics, intellectuals, entrepreneurs, scientists from any country in the U.S. We're shooting ourselves in the foot with the hurdles we put in the way of people trying to get H-1B visas. And guess what's going to happen if China's recruiting the best and the brightest from all over the world, and we're preventing them from getting their visas?
Okay, next one up is Tesla is rumored to be behind a giant deal to bring LFP battery cell production to the United States. Chinese battery cell manufacturer confirmed that it has entered into a very important deal to supply LFP battery cells to an unnamed large U.S. company, supposedly Tesla. And the next one is from Pat. Is artificial intelligence about to transform the mammogram? An MIT researcher has devised a radical technique, an AI that can predict breast cancer, but it's a long climb from the lab to the real world. And the next one's from Eric I.O. About genetic sequencing called NextSec 2000. And indeed they are continuing to make a lot of progress on lowering the price and barriers to doing genetic sequencing, which will lead to the recreation of smallpox and wipe us all out. Hello from my private island in Thailand, everybody. The next one is a dinosaur embryo has been found inside a fossilized egg, and here's what that means from CBS News. And Heyman sends in one that half of Americans want to switch to Starlink satellite internet. And here's why. Starlink is bringing the internet to more and more rural areas, and surprisingly large number of people want into Elon's big project of getting 75 megabits per second down for $99 a month anywhere in the world. It's fantastic. Phone batteries could last a week with a new chip. IBM and Samsung say the chip could also reduce the carbon footprint of technologies that use huge amounts of electricity, such as crypto mining. And we could have week-long batteries. That would be great in your phone. A new EU travel restriction that COVID vaccine boosters will be required after 9 months to travel freely. All the countries in the EU and the Schengen zone have been using the EU digital COVID certificate to allow anyone to move freely around Europe. And meaning that a booster shot will become a requirement to keep that vaccine passport up to date. The next one is Open Brain Computer Interface creates brain computer interfaces for gaming and more. A company called OpenBCI creates brain computer interfaces for gaming and more, from the Washington Post. I just tweeted that. And then there's an article in Bloomberg about Rolex, Hermes, and Gucci NFTs, the biggest luxury houses seeing billions in the metaverse, and here's why. And the next one is eSport from Ken, that esports could rival major sports in betting opportunities and attract a new generation of gamblers. Esports is off to a slow start for the casino industry, but industry leaders believe its future has the potential to bring total bets closer to major professional sports. And American workers are burnt out and bosses are struggling to respond. According to the Washington Journal, workplace stress is rampant and resignations have risen. Employers are struggling to stop employees from leaving and to boost morale. And there's a new phone out called the Awesome OV1, OSOM OV1, the new phone from the team. And the whole point of the phone is to focus on privacy. So you're going to start seeing that whole category. And BioNTech's mRNA cancer vaccine has started phase 2 clinical trial. That's colorectal cancer was chosen by BioNTech as the experimental vaccine target due to its disease relative high relapse phase. So we might see the beginnings right here, right now, of cancer vaccines. Holy smokes. And that's the flip side to the dystopian case of smallpox. So we'll have both the cure for cancer, and it'll only cost us a smallpox pandemic.
I want to say that a lot of people at the beginning of the pandemic, or should I say at the beginning of the vaccine, were asking, how can you find a vaccine for COVID in a couple of months, but you can't find a cure for cancer, or whatever the headline was. And here we go. So it's interesting that that one came out speedily after Omicron. So it's funny.
Yep.
In my world, at least.
I still have 2.5 hours of the most recent 2.5 hours of tweets. So if you shared a tweet since the room started 2 hours ago, I didn't have a chance to get to it, but we will get to it tomorrow. And thank you to everybody for another fun headline-filled tech news around the world. We will see you next time. Give us a follow on the Twitter, and have a wonderful rest of your